How's everybody doing tonight? We are starting with some reading comprehension practice. We're just going to present a few little things about reading comprehension as a whole. And actually, for whatever reason, something kept coming up again and again and again in a lot of my sessions today, talking with people about reading comprehension. And it's kind of nice. It was just sort of fortuitous. It comes up on the same day as I'm going to do the reading comprehension session. So I'm going to add a little bit of information on the onto one of the slides is like an aside, like it's just not in one of my slides. It's something I hadn't anticipated in the past. So let's go ahead and get started. So what is reading comprehension? If you guys had to describe it in words, what would you call reading comprehension? Okay, the ability to understand and articulate the material you read. All right. Any others? Make inferences from the author's meaning. Brings up an interesting combination of words. We, as readers, infer, what does the author do as the writer? It's another I word. It often gets very much confused with infer and what it actually means. The reader infers things that the author implies. Yes, the author makes implications. They tell us something with evidence to get us to think a certain thing. As readers, we take that information and we infer its meaning from what the author implied. And that's actually how those words are supposed to be worked together. The MCAT does kind of morph those words a little bit and just like say they're really the same thing. Like the way the questions are written is really how the word gets used. So the author implied in the following paragraph, blah. It can be inferred from the author's writing that blah. So they're really two sides of the same coin. So we don't really make the much distinguishing. We don't distinguish them from each other. My definition I have on this slide is the ability to process the text, understand its meaning, and integrate with what the reader already knows. Now let's pick each one of those apart real quick. Process text. What is probably the two most important things to processing the text? Number one, do you understand grammar? And this is a weakness that a lot of people have. If you suffer with grammar mistakes in your writing, it actually makes it harder for you to read well because you don't know what that comma meant. You don't know what that structure meant that they're using because it's grammatically correct. If you have a harder time with grammar, you may actually struggle a little bit with reading comprehension. So that's one thing. What's the other really, really big thing that people, American students, tend to be weak at, but people that are non-native speakers have a bigger weakness at? What would an American student be weak at that a non-native speaker would be very, very weak at? Starts with a V, ends with a VAB. There you go. Vocabulary. Vocabulary. The weaker a person's vocabulary, the harder it is to process and decode that text. That's what I usually call this, decoding or exhibiting fluency in a language. So you have to have a vocabulary that's pretty strong to be able to do this. You have to understand what the sentence construction is telling you. So it's these things that go into the grammar and vocab that I'm talking about here. Because if you don't understand the vocabulary as well as you could, or you don't understand the grammatical structure, you are definitely going to lose meaning out of it. So how do you get better at something like that? Practice. Honestly, getting out old ACT or SAT vocabulary drill or grammar drill is not a bad thing if you struggle with those things. If you find that you're really struggling with like those two categories of things, the vocab and the grammatical issues, go back and just rough go through that again. Get like an old ACT, SAT book, do some re-upping of this information in your brain. Understanding when you use a comma will help you understand why the author decided to use a comma there. Understanding when you use a semicolon or a long dash, which are structures that people are very unfamiliar with. If you see it, you don't understand why the author did it, but it implies a lot of information. And taking that stuff, once you start getting that information from it, then you can bring in your reasoning skills and, in fact, a little bit of background knowledge on something to sort of integrate it into what you know. So now let's be careful about background knowledge. Should you bring in knowledge about a subject into the car section? Absolutely no, not ever. Because if you do, you might actually misinterpret what the author's saying. But when I'm saying background knowledge here, what I'm talking about is knowledge of the way people talk about things. So like if I'm talking about Greek mythology, understanding how mythology works as a whole, that's the kind of background knowledge you might have, because it gives you at least a foothold into what the person's even talking about. And that's what makes certain subject matters harder than others, because if you absolutely hate Greek mythology or mythology as a whole, are those passages going to be easy for you to integrate into your own knowledge? No, because it's something that you're not knowledgeable about. It makes it more difficult. So how do you fix that problem? And really, that's something that's difficult to fix now. Like, say if you're taking the test in 3 months, it's not something you really change at this point. What you can do is, if you're a younger student, say if there's any freshmen in here, just be more well-read. Read other things that you're not used to reading. If you don't like reading financial news, read the Wall Street Journal. Read poetry. Read Walt Whitman. Read mythology texts or books. Read about stuff that you don't normally read about, to expand your vocabulary, to expand your knowledge of those subjects. And the more reading you do, the better. Like, this is the funny thing is, my house is filled with books. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 large bookcases filled with books, and I've read every single one of them. That's because I'm 45 or 40. How old am I? 47, and I've had plenty of time to read them. I don't expect you guys to have read that much at this point, but I want you to read more. More you read, the more different things you read, the better at reading you're going to get overall, because you're going to get exposure to lots of different topics and things will connect with your knowledge. And then the last thing is, you've got to engage your working memory and your attention, which means you need to do an active reading process, not just going through and reading the words or skimming through the words, but taking the time to engage and say, what does this mean? What does the author mean by saying this? Like, when you get to a natural break in the passage, or a pause in the sentence or something like that, say, why did the author do that? Why did they take the time to make this distinction between A and B? That's going to be your more working type memory. That's your active attention being focused on the task at hand. That is called active reading. And that's asking questions. So when you're reading, you should be asking yourself questions about what the author was trying to do and trying to say. All our knowledge results from questions, which is another way of saying question asking is our most important intellectual tool. How many people here have gone through a whole class and never asked a question, and then tried going through a class and asking lots of questions? Anybody ever had that scenario where they've done both, they've tested the waters both ways, no questions at all, and then asking questions in a class? Was there a difference in how much you retained from that class and what you learned from that class? huge amount of retention difference. And sometimes you don't get a choice. Like sometimes they don't let you ask questions. And those, in my opinion, are the worst types of classes. This is why with Khan Academy videos, it's harder to learn from something like that. It's harder to learn from Khan. It's harder to learn from reading a book because you have to ask your questions to yourself. You can't ask somebody else to fill that in. And that's what we got to do here with reading comp. You got to ask yourself, what does that even mean? Yeah, recorded lectures. I can't stand recorded lectures because I'm not allowed to ask, can I go back a slide? Or nobody can ask me a question about what is meant. So it's really an important tool. So like when you're reading, you got to say, what did that sentence mean? If it doesn't make much sense, stop, pause for a second, read it again, and make sure you understand what that means by saying, what does it mean to yourself? Or literally saying in every paragraph, yourself, what is the main idea of this paragraph? What is the purpose of this paragraph? What is the main idea of the text? Why did the author write it this way? Were they trying to convince us? Were they trying to do something else? And these are things I've emphasized before. What is the attitude of the author? Like I just read a passage with an SAT student and just before this, and wow, the person that wrote the passage was very angry against the writers of the Constitution. He even had this really bold statement to say the writers of the Constitution were just hiding behind their fancy words to walk all over people. Like that is a very bold statement. And that's why I asked him, I was like, what do you think the author was saying by this? And so you got to ask those questions of yourself to actually actively engage with it. Where are the transitions? Where's the author speaking, or where is it somebody else is speaking through their words? So these are the types of questions you should be asking while reading. Is there any one set of questions you should ask yourself? No, but just literally just ask anything. If you're not sure what it means, ask yourself. You can't ask other people, just ask yourself. Questions are so important. Now, here's where I'm going to break away for 1 second. There's barriers to understanding in this stuff, and we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to do some passages. But before that, I also want to deal with something else that's been coming up all day long with a lot of the students I talked about, their troubles with reading comprehension. And it dawned on me, something I was seeing with many of these students was looking at the text on the page, and instead of simply inferring, but instead reading between the lines. Now, some of you guys have actually been told a good reader will read between the lines. What does that mean to read between the lines? Not to skim, not to infer, because infer means something definitely different than read between the lines. Reading between the lines is one step past infer. Yeah, it's seeing the hidden meaning from the sentences. Now, when you start to ask yourself, what's the hidden meaning? What are they really saying by saying this? Are you staying true to what is on the page? Not at all. And what they'll do is they'll take what's on the page and they'll do that. They'll read between the lines to create bad answer choices. You should never read between the lines on especially a standardized test version of reading comp. You should simply say, what do these words say? Don't go with what your interpretation of what they say is. What do the actual words on the page, what are they saying? So you've got to watch yourself from taking it a little bit too far. And that's where the danger is in this word infer, right? A lot of us think the word infer means what is our understanding of what they're saying. It's not what is our understanding of it, is what is our interpretation of that specific set of words and what we think it says. And if the author did a good job of writing, it should mean the same thing. We should be able to say it's the same thing. The mistake comes when we start to go that next step and say, well, what I think the author really meant by this. No, the author didn't really mean anything. All we can interpret is what the author actually said. So we've just got to be careful not to read between the lines. Watch for that in your answer choices, by the way. If you get a question wrong, see if your answer just goes at one layer deeper past what the words on the page said. If it just goes even a smidgen past what the words on the page said, it cannot be a correct answer. It's just very weird. That came up when like 4 sessions I was having with students today. So I figured I'd bring it up. So what do you guys see as the barriers towards understanding a CARS passage? What are some of the things that keep you from doing well here? Fatigue, definitely an issue. At least CARS comes before the break. So that can affect you for sure. What do you mean the flow of the passage? Definitely double thinking or like reason, like going back and forth on answers like, yeah, it could mean this, but it might also mean this, but it could also mean this, but it could also mean this. Doing that whole back and forth thing. And in that case, that there's an easier solution to that. If you find yourself in that waffle rerun, just stop answering the question, move on, come back to it with a fresh mind. So you've got to recognize you're doing it, number one, but when you do recognize you're doing it, just stop trying to answer the question at that point. You're not going to get anywhere. All you're going to do is go around in this vicious little circle and you're not going to move out of it. If the author's word choice doesn't make sense to me, it's hard to pass through and continue. Okay, I think what you might be talking about is writing style. For example, for some people, it's hard to read stuff that's written in the 1700s or 1800s because their style was a very different style of writing than it is currently. Or for me, reading Henry David Thoreau, oh my God, it's like reading Greek. It is so hard for me to read Henry David Thoreau. But how do we get better at that? How can we get better at that process? Practice reading. And that's not practice CARS reading. That's like literally what I meant by if you have more time, just start reading stuff you're not comfortable with in your day-to-day life. Read journal articles, read Wall Street Journal, read books that you would never pick up. Like I recently picked up a Kurt Vonnegut book called Galapagos. Anybody read that book? It's really bizarre. The style of writing is freaky, and it's taking me a little bit longer to get through it because of it. But on the other end, I'm going to have another style of reading that I can do better because I've read this really weird book. It's like written from the point of view of a ghost a million years in the past. It's so weird. Anyways, what other things keep us from doing well with CARS? Time, slow reading. If you are a slow reader, it can definitely cause you problems. But there is not a solution for that, but some a nice benefit to the way that the MCAT's set up. If you're not shooting for things past a 512, then you can actually do 9 of the 10 passages and still score a 512. If your accuracy on the other 9 passages is high, do it. I think I brought that up earlier. You could do what I call the 9 passage pace. Just do 9 of the 10 passages, really tuning in on those things, and just skip that last passage. Just guess on all the answers. Think more physical. Are there any physical barriers to reading this stuff? I 100% agree with you. You can't touch it. You can't put your finger on the screen and move across the lines because that helps certain people like myself read, like following it with my finger. The most you could do is use the mouse cursor. Don't forget, you can scan back and forth with your mouse cursor. That is a perfectly good way for those of us that need that to do that, to like move the finger back and forth, and it's not the same, but it's the only thing we can do, right? So we have to learn to live with that, but it is the only way to really do it. Because if you try to put your finger up to the screen, they're going to get upset. They might, you know, kick you out for that. Remembering where information is. So this is where a little bit of annotation can help. Something you might try is on your scratch paper, just write P1, P2, P3, P4, P5, P6 before you read the passage, and then write a note, like just like a couple keywords for each paragraph to help you sort of map out where the information is on the passage. That's a good way to keep you like finding it a little bit better, and it doesn't take that much effort. It only takes a couple seconds to jot 2 or 3 words down per paragraph. I'm not talking like summarize it or anything, but just keywords that can help you find things more quickly. Or some people also do this, where you write down the number of questions, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, Q5. And as you're reading, if you pre-read the questions, you can go, oh, passage 1 answers question 1, passage 3 and 5 for question 2. And you could also match it up that way. Anything you can do to map together. Here's one that I'm going to put out there that I see a lot of students do that they're not aware of. When you're scanning text or reading text, you're not reading all the way to the edge of each of the lines. I see this all the time with people that are used to reading on screens, is you don't get all the way left and don't get all the way right. So if there's a word that's either the first word or the last word on the page, or on the each side of the column, you tend not to be able to find that word. Because what does our brain do when we jump to the next line? Do we need to actually perceive the word to understand it? Our brain literally fills in the gaps. There's all kinds of little gag exercises out there where it'll be a paragraph. It looks like a normal paragraph, except the first and last word on every line is missing. And you read it just fine. Your brain fills in all those words. You don't even think about it. And that's what happens. So try to force yourself to read from the beginning of the line to the end of the line. Like move your head back and forth if you have to, or get that mouse cursor involved so you're going all the way left and all the way right. I see it all the time where somebody doesn't find the word just simply because it's the first or last word on the page or on the column, the line. One other thing along those lines that I want to warn you against: how many people find themselves when they're reading on text on screen have their finger on the mouse wheel? And what ends up happening? You're constantly scrolling, aren't you? Instead of having your head move down the words, you move the words to your eyes. If you're doing that, that is actually decreasing your comprehension of what you're reading. There's been several major studies done in recent years that have found screen readers are actually not getting as much out of it as paper readers, because they have a tendency to constantly be scrolling, and instead of letting the words just sit on the page and reading it, you scroll the words right past you thinking you're getting the same effect, and it starts strobing. Exactly, paper over text wins. It's like strobing the words past your eyes so fast, you never get time to settle on it. So it's like you're not getting the same input into your brain. So it's surprisingly some of these little things that we don't think about, the way we use our mouse, that can really affect us in cars. So like, just take your hand off the mouse for a minute, like put it aside, read what's on the page, then scroll to the next paragraph, and then read what's on the page, and then scroll to the next paragraph, and so on and so forth. And it does. It comes from this constant screen reading on iPads and stuff, tablets, where we're just touch, and we're moving things so fast. We've forgotten how to take our time with reading. And like, God, what is it? Facebook or something, I can't remember, says like how long the news article is going to take you to read. Like, since when did that become a thing? We've become so obsessed with how long it takes to read, we've forgotten how to just read. It's just really weird. So yes, archaic book reading skills are still useful. This is why I still prefer paper books. I know it takes up a heck of a lot of space, and every time I move, I'm moving like hundreds of pounds of books, but I don't care. I like my books. I like paper. So yes, especially the old acid paper books. Old library. Smells so good. So yummy. All right. So like I'm sure there's other barriers, but one of the things I want to you guys to leave this particular part of the session from is that there's always a solution. You can always do something to counter these bad habits, the poor grammar, the poor vocabulary that we might have, or the lack of motivation, because that's when it didn't come up. Like, I might not want to read this passage. Like, God, I don't want to read it because I think it's boring. Or losing concentration, or the way the light is in the room, bad lighting, bad ventilation. There's like, just adjust your screen a little bit, tilt the screen, do something like that. So there's always a way to get through this stuff. And just spend some time finding and focusing on these little minutiae that you don't normally think about, and you will find a better way to do your car section. All righty, so let's put our pen to paper now. Let's actually do some passages. So I'm going to drop some passages into the chat box. There's 2 of them here. We can do this in one of 2 ways. We can do them both and then review them both back to back, or we can do one, review it, do another, review it. What's your guys' preference? Do them both back to back, or do one and review, do one and review? So it looks like right now back to back's winning over review one and do one and review it. Anyone else want to weigh in on this? 3 back to backs. Going once, going twice. We're going to go back to back then. So how many minutes should I give you to do them back to back? 20 minutes. You should be averaging about 10 minutes per passage. So there's my timer. So I'm going to set a timer here for 20 minutes. And we'll get started. So everybody ready to go? I'll say that one person speaks for everybody. Let's go ahead and do this. There's 2 people. All right, on your marks, get set, and do those passages. Go. All right, that's time. What did you guys think? Good, bad? Was one of them harder than the other? First one good, second one bad? Oof. I thought the first one, the language is harder, but I think the questions are a little bit more straightforward. And then the human capabilities, I think the language is easier, but the questions are harder. So I think they're about the same difficulty as far as like overall, but definitely there's a distinct difference between the two. All right, let's start with this big puppy. In like a sentence, can anybody summarize what they're trying to say here in this passage? What's like the main idea of the passage? This is one of the things I can't stand about Zoom is I can't tell if you're writing anything and I'm just waiting for somebody else to write or what. So I'll give it a little bit longer to see if anybody's writing a sentence what they think the main point of this passage is about. Okay, most kings didn't treat rebellion as treason. I think that one's it's a summary, but you're leaving one piece out. Edward I is bad. He has influence on treason. Now let's put the two together. Let's take those two smaller ideas, put them together. And I think you've really got the heart of this. I think the focus on this is how treason has changed over the years based on who was king. It's not really about the kings as much, is it? Or is it about the treason more? I mean, even the title of it's treason, right? They gave us a title and it says treason. So I think it's more of like how things changed. So how treason in the past wasn't treated this way, but then Edward I did. So there's like some kind of, it's the change that's part of this. All right. Tone, positive, negative, neutral. Was it informative? I'd say this is not persuasive. It's more on the informative side. So it's probably got more of a neutral tone in most places. Like even when he's discussing the cruelty of Edward I, it doesn't get like super negative about him. It's just like it's saying it in straight up terms. Okay, so number one, according to the passage, feudal law did not require treason trials. What is the evidence for this statement? Where am I going to look to find this evidence for this statement? This would be most evident in paragraph 2. I agree. Because if we're looking at paragraph 2, it starts with, in this periodic, it is in its periodic disloyalty, the English nobility was no worse and no better than any other similar class. So it's talking about treason, and then it's starting to give us reasons why. So what do we think of A? Good or bad choice? At the time, English kings were just elevated nobles. Good or bad? I would put it bad. It's not a good answer for this question because is that really what they're saying in this paragraph? That just English kings were just elevated nobles? I don't think so. I think it's out of scope of that paragraph, honestly. Out of scope? Get rid of it. How about B? Circumstances shielded rebels from severe consequences for rebelling. Good or bad? I think it works because they're saying English nobility is no worse, blah, 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 and the English kids had their moments of acute discomfort. Yet they were never provoked into proscription of defeated partisans. It seems probable that the feudal law and, in a lesser degree, the position of the kings as payers of homage to the kings of France combined to protect those who levied war on the king. So who are those that levy war? On the king, that is? Who are those that levy war? Those are the rebels. Those are the ones that commit treason. And so feudal law made it so the treason was unnecessary. I think they're saying that it's this feudal law and this fact that English kings paid homage to the kings of France. Those are circumstances. I think it fits. How about C? The death penalty was used as a punishment for some crimes. Is that a true statement? Yeah, it ain't scope of this question, because this question is really about paragraph 2 and the reasons why feudal law did not require treason trials. So that, I would agree, out of scope. It is stated in the passage. I would also call this recycled language, because we're recycling that statement from another paragraph that's not relevant to this question. French kings encourages nobles to overthrow their British counterparts. Good or bad? This is bad. It's a misinterpretation of what it said. Did it say the French kings encouraged nobles to overthrow the British counterparts? Or did you read between the lines to get that? This is perfect. I didn't even realize this. This is a total read between the lines question answer. It's a straight over interpretation. D is out. You could assume that's what it says, but it didn't actually say that. B is the most reasonable answer for this particular question. So B is our answer. All right, question 2. The passage suggests that Edward I was an unusual king of England for his time because. Where are we going to find this info? I would go paragraph 4, to be honest, but I can see why you might think paragraph 3. Reason paragraph 4 is because that's where we are introducing Edward I. Unlike the reign of Edward I, the men who suffered, now they're switching gears. I think I would be looking paragraph 4 plus for this one, because that's where they're starting to talk about what Edward's things are. So he was able to keep his nobles from successfully rebelling. Was that true? Is that a true statement? That's a reversal. They said he had to kill a lot of people to keep them from rebelling. So, or because they rebelled. So I would say A is a reversal of what the passage actually said. It did say something about it, but it's like, nah, he didn't successfully do that. He killed a lot of rebellers. Believed that the law was subject to his personal whims. Good or bad? It is tempting. We'll keep it because it is a tempting answer. Wanted to enforce feudal law as neutrally as possible. Like, that's straight up opposite, right? They're making the point that he was completely biased in how he did it, but he's also the king, so he can change the law. Are you saying C, or is that an argument of B? Okay, because he's a king. But again, are those the words that were said? Right. So like, I think that, again, that's that interpretation of B. We could assume that's true, but I don't know if it said that outright. What about D? Treated rebellions staged against him as treasonous acts. Yeah, and right, I think the really big selling point for D is the fact that up till this point, which was treason a treasonous, or was a rebellion a treasonous act? Was it treated as treason? No, it was like, whatever. Okay, you slap on the wrist, go back to your ruling your little fiefdom, whatever. So it's the distinct change in language about treason that happened in this paragraph that makes B a better answer than, or D a better answer than B. But again, I think B actually suffers from the same thing I was talking about before. It's reading between the lines. I have a new elimination tactic. I discovered it today. I'm in love with this elimination tactic. Number 3, which of the following discoveries, if genuine, would most weaken the author's argument? Most weaken. So what is the author's argument? We'll come back to that, Rachel. What is the author's argument in this thing? Edward's a bad king. He changed treason to be a bad thing. Okay. A, successful rebellions against the king were often followed by periods of anarchy in England. Assuming that's true, yeah, he took it personally as well. Assuming A is true, does it weaken the author's argument? No, because did they really discuss what happened after rebellions, or did they talk about punishing rebellions? The passage about punishment, not what came after the rebellions. So we don't know. That doesn't really apply. I think it's out of scope. Edward I, the change to treason law still influence legal theory on treason today. It's a tempting answer. Let's keep it. C, Edward I justified punishing rebels with the death penalty by citing laws given in the Bible. I like that one a lot better because of what Sori said. She said Edward I took the rebellion personally. So we find out that he's basing it on the Bible and not because it's personal. That's a pretty big weakening of the argument, would you say? Yeah. So I think I like C better than B, so I'm putting a question mark on B. How about D? After Edward I, rebellions in England were less frequent and less likely to secede. Good or bad? Again, out of scope. I actually argue that A, B, and D are out of scope for all the same reason. They're all talking about when. After. Like Edward I changed the treason law is still influencing. That's after. This passage wasn't talking about now or even the short time after a rebellion might have been successful. It's talking about in the here and now rebellions. So that makes C our best answer. And C is like just hits the nail on the head because we got to realize the real purpose of this thing was like, or what the author's argument was that Edward took it personally. So going back to 2 for a second, B is an over-interpretation of what the passage said. Does anything in the second paragraph, or the fourth paragraph, tell us that he believed the law was subject to his whims? Does it say that in so many words? So what is it saying in paragraph 5? What do you mean it's a question? I'm not sure what you mean it's a question. Yes. Yeah, by all means. If you guys talk, it's a whole lot easier to understand what you're saying. But please do.
Yeah, so I was looking at paragraph 5. It says, it like, although it has the words that a law of treason in accordance with his own whim, like it looks right, but the author actually says it's a question that needs to be answered whether it is true.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. The question arises whether So it's not stating that he believes it's a whim.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. It's a misinterpretation of that question, of that statement, that makes B incorrect. B is assuming that's not a question. That's a fact. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So, and that's what I mean by reading between the lines. That in that particular elimination case, it's taking that and saying, well, okay, it's not a question anymore. It's just it's a statement of fact. So good. You caught your mistake there. I like it when people do that. It's awesome. Number 4. What do laws regarding high treason before the reign of Edward I imply about rebellions? Where are we probably going to find this one? Paragraph 3. I think this is a paragraph 3 question. So, looking paragraph 3. Okay. What do laws regarding they were not punished or prosecuted consistently? It's not brought up in there. It might look right, but is that what they're talking about in paragraph 3? Is the consistency or whether or not they're punished? Nah. So since they're not talking about it in that paragraph, we can't say for sure whether or not that is a good answer for this. Well, we can say it's not a good answer for this because it's not in that paragraph. Again, it's got to say it for it to be right. It can't just be interpreted, an extended interpretation there. They did not seek to depose the ruling king. If anything, they're talking about assassinating the king. Is that deposing the king? Possibly. It seems like a bit of a reversal to me. I agree. Reversal. It's kind of contrary to what the passage is saying. C, they did not necessarily involve or assist the king's enemies. So how does it contradict the passage? It said, did the rebellions help the enemies? So in contrast, there are other crimes from much earlier times that can be held as high treason whose perpetrators had usually suffered death. They comprised, as we have seen, the compassing of the king's death and affording of aid, whether tangibly or by mere device, to his enemies. planning the king's action were always treasonous. Is this saying if those were treasonous, that's the same thing as rebellion in the first couple of paragraphs? Or are they different things? Are they talking about something new here? In contrast, there were what kind of crimes? What's that say right there? In contrast, there were other crimes. Other crimes than what? What are they referring back to in that sentence? This is what I mean by grammar, by the way. What were they talking about in the first two paragraphs? Well, treason laws are not crimes. What was the crime they were discussing in those first two paragraphs? They were discussing rebellion. There you go. In the first two paragraphs, they're discussing rebellion specifically. In this paragraph, they say, in contrast, there were other crimes which were from much earlier times. These other crimes are assisting the king or assassinating the king. You might think that's rebellion, but that's not what the passage is saying. That rebellion didn't have to include those things to be considered rebellion. So that makes C actually a pretty darn good answer. So it's funny how that one sentence that most people will disregard, that transition term, that actually makes the whole thing better. It makes the whole thing make sense. So pay attention to the transitions in passages. Things like transitions are very important. Like sentences like that can strongly influence the meaning of the passage. So that would make C a pretty good answer. They rarely involve large scale military engagements. What's that answer? Yeah, the paragraph isn't talking about the scale of engagement, so it's out of scope. C is our best answer. That's a surprising answer, isn't it? That one's kind of shocks you, right? So in a nutshell, what the question is saying is, what are laws about high treason? So here's what I think the problem is. How many of you guys are equating treason to rebellion? Probably more, but that is what's probably going on. Treason is this thing that we call it, like, it's high crimes and misdemeanors or whatever it's what we call it in the US, but rebellion is a type of treason is what they're saying, and assassinating the king is a type of treason, and planning or helping the king's enemies is a type of treason. So you can't equate treason with any single one of them because they're all types of treason. That's what the passage is telling us. Oh, interesting. Right, number 5. The author seems to be trying to understand blank. Okay. Why Edward I was seen as such a big bad king after his reign? Is he trying to figure that out? He or she or whatever this author is? What kind of passage was this? Informative. So are you figuring stuff out in informative passages usually? Nah, it's probably not what's going on. What changed rebellion into a treasonous act in England? Does that seem okay? It actually seems pretty good. In fact, here's a great thing that just happened. This answer choice did what to our understanding of how rebellion and treason relate? Are treason equivalents, or is rebellion a crime and treason is this law or something like that? What does this answer choice confirm for us? That they're not equivalent. Yeah. And sometimes later questions can do that. And it's like, oh, I get it now. Like, I'll be honest, first time I went through the passage, I was kind of doing the same thing. Then I saw this question and I figured it out. So why treason is still seen as such a terrible crime? Again, I would say out of scope because why? This passage isn't asking why, it's telling us what. Which king transferred English treason the law the most? I got rid of this one because of the language. Does the language match? Like the most. What changed it the most? It's too extreme. Extreme language. Get rid of it. B is our best answer. Dun dun dun. All right, number 6. On the basis of this passage, determine which of the following acts the author claims Edward I would treat as treasonous. So let's see. This is outside the passage knowledge, or not outside the passage, but reasoning outside the passage. Defecting from the military during a time of war. What do you think of that one? Is it on fleek or bad answer? I don't even know what on fleek means. Yeah, I don't think it has anything. Defecting didn't seem to come up in here. So I would say it's out of scope. Writing a letter lobbying for land reform. Lobbying for land reform? Is it considered rebellious? Is the passage even talking about it? Again, this is out of scope. This is not what the passage was about, like lobbying for land reform. How about marching an army into London to challenge his legitimacy? Yeah, that's definitely a let's overthrow the king kind of thing. That seems to be matching this idea of treason. Advising his brother on the best way to attack France. That's a reversal. Like, in fact, that would probably be something the king would love because he wants to get it back at France for whatever reason. It's a reversal. C, definitely our answer. Yes, yes, yes. Alrighty. Number 7. The author's claim that Edward I took rebellions personally is supported by. Supported by. So we got to find support for that. What paragraph are we going to look for this? Got scared for time. I would say paragraph 5, and here's why. The question arises whether Edward I, in whom some modern writers have detected a brutal, vicious streak, developed a law of treason in accordance with his own whim, or whether the legal process of state trial is a natural expression of law. So it's making that case that this is like it's making this is where the evidence is coming for what was said in paragraph 4. So paragraph 4 is where it was brought up, and now we're saying, okay, paragraph 5, here's my details for it. So A, an opinion about his understanding of the legal system. It's actually a misinterpretation, because are we talking about the are we talking about either the author's or Edward I's misunderstanding of the legal system? Look at that sentence that says legal system. The question arises whether Edward I, in whom some modern blah, 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 or whether the legal process of the state trial was a natural expression of the law. It's not talking about it in conjunction with Edward I, or really the author's understanding of the legal system. They're just saying whether the legal system is an extension of the land of the state. That's actually a misinterpretation. I would say that is, in a way, a reading between the lines. You may think that's what the interpretation is, but that's not what it is. A description of the state of England during his reign. Good or bad? Not the greatest. I mean, because there's a lot of description about this reign in England, like the whole last 3 paragraphs. I'd say it's not very narrow focused. I'm not going to get rid of it yet. A reference to the issue with Scotland that first changed his mind. I don't see any issues with Scotland here that are relevant. D, a description of what David ap Gruffydd personally did to the king. Good or bad? Did they describe what David ap Gruffydd did? Where is that name? Ah, there we go. But did they really? Just a description of what he did personally to the king. I would say I don't think that's a personal description. Like, but in the process of Shrewsbury against David ap Gruffydd in 1282, the English state trial had its origins in the quasi-treason of levying war against the king to take new status. It doesn't actually say, give a description. Like, levying war, that's just crime. That's not a description of what he did personally to the king. So I think D is just a little too graphic, not graphic, but too specific. I think it's not getting that much detail. So I have 4 answers here that I really don't like. Crap. What do we do in this kind of scenario? Reevaluate your answers. So I'm going to go back to A. An opinion about his understanding of the legal system. I just don't feel like it. Based on the last paragraph, in the various trials for treason, Edwards involved on a personal level. Serious traitor's private enemy. He took their attacks personally, and so therefore would personally attend to their legal fate. The temptation, therefore, to act in a despotic way against those, for example, who denied him trial possession of Scotland is very great. This is not a reasonable hope to study. It may shed some light on the issue of despotism as well. This is a tricky question. The correct answer is actually A. And here's why it's A. And why did I do that? Why did I actually cross out A? I want to show you sometimes that sometimes you're going to make a bad decision, but you got to be okay with it. Because I would have picked B on this one. I did pick B the first time I did this question. The correct answer for this one is A. And so let's dig into this one a little bit more. What are they saying about this whether the legal process thing was a natural expression of the law of the land? Before Edward came to the throne, the author of the Song of Lewes had cast doubts on his reverence for the law. Whatever he wants, he holds to be lawful and thinks that there are no legal bounds to his power. So does that, I wanted to prove something there. Does that actually say he understands the legal system, that next statement? The Song of Lewes statement? Let me rephrase the question. in that sentence, before everybody came to throne, the author of the Song of Lose, does that sentence say he understands the law, or is he making choices based on his own preferences? Yeah, it is kind of saying that, because if you make choices based on your own preferences, are you in fact understanding the law as it is written? I would argue that that's probably our best answer here, because B is a pretty sucky answer too. Description of the state of England during his reign. They're just describing it. Does that really explain why he takes it personally? Not really. So I would have to go back and reevaluate and say, hey, now, why did I do this? Why did I cross out the correct answer, Madeline and Van Schika? Why would I do that? And I'm picking on you guys particularly because of your guys' response. Why did I cross out A even though it was the correct answer in my first pass through? That's actually right, because second guessing is a blank. Because what I wanted to have people do is go, but wait, no, I don't. No, here's why I think it's this answer. Because I want you to fight with me, guys. I don't want this to be always, when I'm talking about the passages, I don't want you to always take my word as law. I am fallible, as is every teacher out there. And if I say something wrong, I want you to trust yourself enough that you'll go to bat for your answer. And I will occasionally do that. I will cross out a correct answer because I want to see, are you going to say, well, hold up a second, right? So, because what is one of the biggest things about solving or doing well on the MCAT? What have I said a couple times? It's all in your head. This is a mental battle, and you can't let your own self doubt yourself. You have to trust that you made good decisions. And I always want you guys to be able to do that. I mean, an A is not a great answer. I think this is arguably a question in which the best answer is not even a great answer. I don't feel that it's a good model of what this passage is saying. But we don't have a ton of the above option, so we had to go with something. And sometimes you're going to have that question happen. This is an argument, like, actually looking at the percentages of people getting this question correct, less than 50% picked this answer on Jack Weston, which is saying something, because people retake these passages all the time and they're still getting it wrong. Yeah, it really, it's the style of the answer is also different. Like, the descriptions of something don't prove it, don't support it. This opinion, there was a actual piece of evidence given in that case. It wasn't just him saying something. That's a very good catch. I like that. That's a good way to think about it. Alrighty, so I know there's another passage. We didn't get to it tonight. I'll stick around for anybody that does want to discuss individual questions. I didn't expect us to take this long on this passage, but that's okay. We're still new to this. We're still working through the bugs. So this definitely goes better in person, like faster in person. I just can't tell when you're saying things. So the more you guys use the microphones, the better. That would be awesome if you could use microphones for answering questions, if you can do that, just because it's faster, way super faster. Oh yeah, totally. Mics are you never have to ask to use your mic. If you want to answer a question on mic, that is probably the best way to do it, because you'll just get your words out faster. it's just a thing. It's easy not to. I don't know. So I want you to, basically. I like it. So anyways, I'll call it for the masses. If there's anybody that has specific questions about the next passage, I'm happy to stick around it and let's answer those questions. I will go through the answers real quick, just so you know them. Answer to 1 is B. Answer to 2 is B. Answer to 3 is B. Answer to 4 is B. Got nervous at this point, right? Answer to 5 is C. Answer to 6 is D. And answer to 7 is C. Oh, let me monitor the chaos, Madeline. I can take care of that. But yeah, it's so much more difficult to talk via chatting because it's so much slower. People can't say as much, and I have to ask questions. So, okay, talk about number 2, 3, 5, and 7. Look like the questions at hand. 2, 3, 5, and 7. Any others? 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Let's go through. Anybody have a question on 1? No questions on 1. All right, question 2. A reasonable expectation for someone who accepts the author's view on the best way to measure a nation's quality of life would be that the person would believe that. So what was some of your guys' reasoning and answers? So D, people with physical disabilities are usually not well served by the government. D actually is kind of an implication, but it isn't what the words explicitly said. It just said that people with disabilities need more than people without physical disabilities. So D, it doesn't say it in so many words. So I would call that a reading between the lines kind of answer for that one. So yeah, go ahead, Madeline. What are you going to say about B?
I know that I wanted to check just with like my reasoning behind this question, because I know that we're trying our best not to like infer, and I felt like that was what I did. But kind of just the main point of this passage I thought was like it dismantled why GNP and also aggregated utility aren't necessarily like the best ways for a nation's success and happiness to be like equated to, and then it gave like reasons why. And then the last paragraph really talked about like what exactly were the main claims of like what's like Aristotelian social democracy or whatever. And then it said in 2, it was like a reasonable expectation for someone who accept the author's views, and the author, according, I also looked at like just with her tone, I felt like the author was not pro GNP and not pro the other thing. They preferred the last. So in that sense, the best way is the last paragraph where it says that we focus one-on-one. It's about like the individual and like their needs and how resources are assessed in that way. And so that's why I went with like the individuals and how it affects them are more important than just like how a nation is seen as a whole.
I would agree that that is why B is correct, because the passage as a whole was saying GNP doesn't measure quality of life well. And they described quality of life as being about the nation or about the individual. No, as a whole, no. Like I think the middle part of this passage is all about quality of life is actually something that's specific to the individual, like you said, paying attention to the capabilities of these people. But yeah, GNP doesn't do that. GNP talks about the quality of life of the nation, not the people. So yeah, the argument of the author is really trying to focus in on that looking at the individuals is important. The nation, if we just look at something that's relevant to the nation, doesn't tell us about the individuals. So it is a little bit of an extreme statement, but the other answers are definitely not as good. Resource accessibility is not important to a nation's quality of life. I think everybody could probably say that that's not what it's saying, because in fact, it talks about resource accessibility is a more is a better way to do that. And C is saying people are wealthy, who are wealthy are happier than those who are not. Does it even talk about the happiness of people in this passage? I'd say no. It's not really about happiness. It's talking about quality of life. That doesn't mean, like, we're interpreting that to mean happiness, but that doesn't necessarily mean happiness. It never says the statement, happiness is quality of life. So that one's a tricky question because it's like a whole passage question. Number three. So what were some answers that people were a little unsure on this one? So where they did explain it is actually in paragraph 3. This is in paragraph 3. So paying attention to capabilities would address a focus on capabilities takes into account blah, 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 blah. Some of these differences are physical. Right there, they're saying, by the way, here comes an explanation or an example. That phrase, some of these differences. So they're talking about nutritional needs of kids versus adults. They're talking about people that have limbs that work well don't need as much as people with paralyzed limbs. So they're giving specific examples of how different types of people need different amounts of resources. So that's what makes B the best answer here. So did you cross out based on yes, no, Kathleen? So that's actually something I want you to try to avoid. Don't go with the judgment first. Go with the reasoning after the judgment first. Because if you go with the judgment and you're not 100% certain on the judgment, then you might actually cross out your correct answer without giving it a fair shake. So this is like that 2x4 strategy I was talking about. Look at the rest of the answers before you look at the yes, no stuff. Because we also have another one of those in here. It's question 7. All right. What about question 4? What were some difficulties with question 4? It is challenging to do something that you're not used to. So there are no questions on number 4 then? You just read it wrong? In the context of the passage, the term capability refers primarily to the ability to it's actually really subtle. It says it in one place. Where does it say it? First sentence or last paragraph of the first last sentence of the first paragraph. The certain basic minimum level of capability. That is to make sure that all citizens have the equal chance to achieve what they want. There's those words. So it does say it like almost verbatim what their definition of capability is. It's just kind of hidden in plain sight, so to speak. Do what you want. Third paragraph, sentence. The focus on capabilities takes into account the fact that individuals may vary greatly in their need for resources. So you're arguing that for which answer choice? See? But they're not talking about capabilities as having varying needs for resources. They're saying the focus on capabilities requires us to know this. So a focus on capabilities takes into account these other things, but it doesn't say what the capabilities need. All right, number 5. What do we got going on to number 5? So I think we had a few people answer on this one too. I'm impressed you guys are sticking this out. I'm loving it. Eating this up. Granted, I'm exhausted, but. So what answers in number 5 are the sticky ones? Okay, high GNP suggests that a country has more money than other countries. Actually, that's not true, because what is GNP defined as in the question or in the passage? You got to be careful because it's defining it for you. Man, my hands are not steady. So why did I highlight that? It's divided by the amount of people. That is correct. So a small country with a high GDP or GNP versus a large country that has a low GNP, which one has more money? So the country with lots and lots of people, even though each person has less money, still has more money as a total numerical calculation. So bit of a trick answer. They throw those in there from time to time. They had B, nations do not invest enough in measuring their quality of life. Is it saying they don't invest enough in it, or are they saying they just don't measure it well? They're just saying they don't measure it well. They're not implying that they don't invest enough in measuring their quality of life. Again, that's what we want it to mean. That's what we're taking it to mean. It's still a measurement of it, though. It's just a bad measurement of it. So that would negate B. How about C? Economic inequality negatively affects a nation's quality of life. But it was a very specific example given in paragraph 2 on this one. What was the specific example of this? Oh, I found a typo. GNP should be GNP there. I'll fix that. The South Africa example. The crude approach does not even tell us who has the money, and thus typically gives high marks to nations such as South Africa, which contained enormous inequalities. Still less does it provide any information about the elements of human life, life expectancy. So they gave a specific example where quality of life in South Africa, probably not great. Now, what is the problem that I find with this question? This particular statement is this relies on our knowledge of what? This does require outside information. What do we have to know? We have to know what it was like in South Africa for the longest time. We have to remember apartheid. So we have to remember those things that happened in South Africa. So the reason I think this is a poor question is because it does rely on that knowledge. And quality of life is treated like an apolitical concept. It's not talking about politics in here anywhere, so we can get rid of D. So this, what I want to note about that is these passages I'm borrowing from Jack Weston. Not all of the passages are perfect. This would be an example of a passage that takes a little too much liberty with outside information. Because some of you guys are very young. You may not have realized that apartheid was a thing in South Africa. Anybody not know that? Hopefully that's a no. Number 6, suppose that nations who adopt the author's approach, improving quality of life of their citizens, report decreases their GNP. How does this affect the opinions expressed in the passage? So they're giving us a new piece of information. improving the quality of life. So it illustrates the point of Aristotelian social democracy. Whoa, that's a deep one. What are they saying about Aristotelian social democracy? I mean, it's in there. They do bring it up. I'm trying to find it in the passage. Where did it go? In Aristotelian social democracy, I linked it very closely to an account of the proper goal of the government to bring da 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 da. Is it talking about the effects on GNP and how GNP interacts with it? Because I would argue that it doesn't really do that job. It's just saying in Aristotelian social democracy, I linked it very close to an account of proper goal. GNP isn't achieving that goal. So, yeah, I don't think the Aristotelian social democracy is making that point. It doesn't go along with it. I feel it's not out of scope, but it's not the right comparison. No such comparison. They're not comparing those two directly. B, it challenges the passage's author about human capabilities. Are human capabilities tied to GNP? No, like they're explicitly saying they're different things. So it would be like varying one variable and expecting the other one to vary if there's no relationship between them. How about C? It supports the passage's author's claims about GNP. What is the author's claim about GNP? It's a terrible measure of quality of life. So it wouldn't affect the author's argument because the author's not making that argument. So D, it does not affect the opinions expressed in the passage, is the best answer. The none of the above one. So yeah, you got to just fully, truly establish what the argument is, and that is that GNP is just not a good measure of quality of life, that there's other things that are better. And finally, number 7, again, yes, yes, no, no. Don't go after the yes, yes, no, no. Go after the reasoning that's behind the yes, yes, no, no. So we've got one definition of good nation is one that coordinates the work of citizens, allows blah, 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 blah. Okay. The kinds of projects that benefit everyone require everyone's cooperation. That's a tempting answer, but what's wrong with it? Everyone's cooperation. Yeah, it's too extreme. This is a very extreme answer. Projects to help everyone have to require everyone's cooperation. No, it doesn't. We do plenty of things without other people's help. That's too extreme. Too extreme to the max. Individuals are incapable of improving their lives on their own. Good or bad answer? I got rid of this one again because it's too extreme. Individuals are incapable of doing something? Seriously? Too extreme. Way out of the scope of what this thing is trying to say. Citizen happiness is the prime measurement of a government's effectiveness. Good or bad? I would actually argue that that's kind of what this author is trying to say, although I feel it's kind of extreme. Citizen happiness is the prime measure. They said prime, they didn't say the only measure, so it's better than the others. But D is definitely a no-go. A nation that cares about its people would not invest in such projects. How would we know this? Does the passage ever talk about large-scale projects like this? I can see that's why C is not an attractive answer as well. But back to D, does it actually discuss projects in any way, shape, or form, large-scale projects? It doesn't get into these large projects, though. It's more like focusing on the individual. I think that negates D. C is our best answer because of one statement. Again, let's go back to that first paragraph. And a lot of this is planted as sort of seeds in the first paragraph. I linked it very closely to an account of the proper goal of government to bring all citizens to a basic minimum level of capability. The goal of government. So if I'm a good government, if I'm an effective government, I should be reaching that goal. So it's definitely a deep cut in that first paragraph that makes C the best answer choice here. But at the very least, we can pretty safely argue that A, B, and D don't match the tone of the passage. A and B easier, albeit, than D, but yeah, that's what we have to go with. So sometimes it's not a clear-cut decision. So do you see now why I say the first passage is easier on the passage, or sorry, easier on the questions than the passage, and then this one was easier on the passage than the questions? So this is why we practice. This is why we do this kind of stuff, because we gotta find out what our own failings are, what our own biases are. It's really easy to go off kilter on some of these things when you get confused with the passage itself. Well, so one thing about the passage itself, Rachel, is don't necessarily think you have to understand every word of the passage. Notice how I've been jumping around. I've been like targeting individual sentences instead of passage as a whole as much as possible. That's actually going to help you with that like very complicated passage thing. Instead of trying to worry about every single sentence in a paragraph, just try to focus in on like where are the relevant sentences. And you can usually pick apart one or two sentences easier than you can the whole meaning of the paragraph. So try to do that. Like don't go in so much depth on reading and understanding every paragraph in a complex passage. All righty. Well, this was fun. I actually don't mind staying after for something like this. This was cool. I definitely want to start getting through passages a little faster in session, so we don't have to spend this kind of extra time. But I'm happy that you guys are willing to. So thank you for sticking it out today. Appreciate it. Gonna go ahead and call this one. But thanks for coming. Thanks for good discussion. Like I said, please use your mics if you like to use the mics. Please. Question. I've heard that JW passages are, that always makes me laugh when I see JW. So I always think of Jehovah's Witnesses. I guess I've heard that JW passages are made harder on purpose, but is that even true? I don't think so. I don't think they are made that hard. There's some of these that are just like, you'll see some of the Jack Weston passages which are so easy, and then some which are ridiculously complicated. I think some of the complicated ones are actually not because they're written that way. I think it's actually because, like in this case, there's an actual flaw in here. The flaw being that, like, the answer to question 6, whichever one it was, does require you to know about South Africa having political and civil unrest due to income inequality. So that's actually something the MCAT strives not to do. So it would have been stated more explicitly. And I think that's why this particular passage is a little more tricky, just because it's kind of poorly written on the passage side of it. The questions aren't bad, but the passage is a little wonky. So, and I think that's usually the case for most times when you're looking at practice materials. I would rate the quality of the practice materials not on its reputation, but on like, are they well written? So this passage, if you didn't do as great on it, I'm not too unhappy because it's a poorly written passage. And you gotta, be mindful of that kind of thing, so you're not getting super frustrated with questions you can't answer. Because sometimes you can't, because the passage just sucks. That's a great question, Kathleen. Sometimes, most of the time, the passages are very well reviewed. Every once in a while, when I've taken it, I've seen some questionable stuff in there, but it's like not very often, because they got enough money, they can pay people to review those. Plus, they test the passages ahead of time. So one of the passages you get, it's not going to be on the real. That's not going to be counted towards your score. It's going to be counted towards or it's going to be revised based on feedback from that administration, and so it'll be on a future test. So they do test their questions. The Jack Weston passages, the only tests he has is that the fact that they're live. So, and I'm not trying to belittle Jack Weston at all. I think he's got a great resource here, and like there's 365 passages there. It's awesome. It's a great way to get some cars practice in. If I had the time, I would do this myself. I'm actually working on writing some passages for you guys right now anyway. I want to set up a list of like a set of 25 or something that I can use for these programs. Well, that way I can like not be legally like technically I probably shouldn't be using these Jack Weston passages or the Khan Academy passages. At least I'm giving credit where credit's due. So alrighty. So some of you are probably waiting for this. I'll get her. Come on, Jess. Come here. Come here, Stinky. Come on, Stinky butt. There you go. All righty. Thank you guys for coming tonight. Jess is saying bye. Hello. Goodbye. Yeah, she's a stinky butt. You stinky. Have a good night, everyone. You're having trouble standing? What is going on here? Flap yours goodbye. Come here, buddy. Go lay down. Sit. Good girl. Good girl. Any other questions, Crystal? Or are you good to go?